A millionaire CEO hadn't felt in 15 years, but his daughter changed everything. The digital clock on Elias Thorne's desk flipped to 6 a.m., its crisp red numerals echoing the stark precision of his penthouse office. The cityscape sprawled beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows, a million tiny lights mirroring the cold, calculated order of his existence. He rose, his movements as efficient as the robotic arms in his company's automated factories. Each morning was a ritual, a meticulously choreographed sequence designed to maintain control, to keep the chaos of emotion at bay. For 15 years, Elias had built a fortress around his heart, a fortress of steel and silence. A knock, sharp and insistent, broke the stillness. His personal assistant, a woman whose tenure was measured in months, not years, entered with his schedule. "Sir, the board meeting is at 9 a.m. And," she hesitated, her eyes flickering towards a file on her tablet, "Lena Reyes is scheduled to start as the new project manager today." Elias's jaw tightened. "Reyes," he repeated, his voice a low, clipped tone. "Ensure she understands the company protocols. Immediately." Protocols. That was his shield, his mantra. No personal inquiries, no unnecessary contact, no emotional entanglements. 15 years ago, he'd made a vow, a promise to himself that he would never again allow anyone close enough to inflict pain. The memory, a sharp, jagged shard of glass, flashed in his mind. A betrayal, a loss, a wound that refused to heal. He'd learned his lesson. Trust was a weakness, vulnerability, a fatal flaw. He turned back to the cityscape, the distant hum of the awakening city a faint counterpoint to the silence within him. Today, however, felt different. A ripple of unease, a tremor in the carefully constructed order of his world. Lena Reyes. Her name, a whisper of change, hung in the air, a harbinger of a storm he wasn't sure he could weather. The fortress was about to be tested. Elias Thorne's empire, Thorne Industries, was a titan in the tech world. His company pioneered advancements in AI and robotics, reflecting his own preference for logic over emotion. He was known for his ruthless efficiency, his ability to dissect problems with cold precision. His reputation preceded him, a brilliant but icy CEO, a man who valued results above all else. The reasons for his emotional detachment were whispered in hushed tones: a failed engagement, a devastating business betrayal, a loss so profound it had frozen his heart. Whatever the truth, the result was the same: a man encased in emotional armor. Lena Reyes, in stark contrast, was a breath of fresh air. She arrived at Thorne Industries with a blend of confidence and approachable warmth. Her resume spoke of her exceptional project management skills, but her eyes held a spark of something more: a deep empathy, a sense of understanding that transcended mere professional competence. She had a way of making people feel seen, heard, and valued. Their first meeting was a study in contrasts. Elias, behind his imposing mahogany desk, his gaze sharp and assessing. Lena, standing tall, her posture confident but relaxed, her smile genuine. "Ms. Reyes," Elias began, his voice devoid of warmth, "your role here is to deliver results. Personal relationships are irrelevant. Understand?" "Perfectly, Mr. Thorne," Lena replied, her tone professional but her eyes holding a hint of amusement. "I'm here to work, not to socialize." Their interactions in the following days were a delicate dance of professional courtesy and underlying tension. Elias, accustomed to unquestioning obedience, found himself intrigued by Lena's quiet confidence. She didn't flinch under his scrutiny, didn't stammer when he challenged her ideas. Instead, she met his intensity with calm logic, her arguments well-reasoned and persuasive. He observed her interactions with the team, noticing her ability to motivate and inspire, her knack for diffusing tension with a well-placed joke or a kind word. He found himself drawn to her energy, her warmth, a stark contrast to the sterile environment he had cultivated. A flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, a warmth, threatened to melt the ice around his heart. He pushed it away, reminding himself of his vow, of the pain he had sworn never to feel again. But Lena's presence was a constant reminder of what he had lost and what he was denying himself. The first crack in Elias's icy facade appeared during a late-night crisis. A critical AI project was on the verge of collapse, the team exhausted and demoralized. Elias, typically a figure of cold command, found himself strangely drawn to Lena's calm demeanor amidst the chaos. While others panicked, she moved with quiet authority, her problem-solving skills sharp and focused. He watched her, a flicker of admiration in his eyes, as she rallied the team, her words a blend of encouragement and strategic direction. He even found himself offering a rare word of praise, a simple, "Well done, Ms. Reyes," that seemed to surprise both of them. The project was salvaged, and in the aftermath, a subtle shift occurred in their dynamic. Elias, for the first time, allowed himself to acknowledge Lena's presence beyond her professional capabilities. He started noticing the small details, the way she tilted her head when she was deep in thought, the faint scent of her perfume, the warmth in her smile when she interacted with others. These observations, fleeting and almost imperceptible, began to chip away at his carefully constructed barriers. One afternoon, a delivery arrived at Elias's office, a bouquet of vibrant sunflowers. A card, addressed to Lena, accompanied the flowers. Elias, his brow furrowed, read the card. "Thinking of you. Mark." A pang of something unfamiliar, a sharp, unexpected twist in his gut surprised him. He quickly dismissed it as professional annoyance, but the image of Lena with another man lingered in his mind. He found himself seeking her out, not for work-related matters, but for brief, almost casual conversations. He asked about her weekend, her hobbies, her background. These inquiries, seemingly innocuous, were a stark departure from his usual detached demeanor. He even found himself smiling, a rare and unsettling occurrence that left his staff bewildered. However, Elias's attempts to connect were often followed by a swift retreat. He would catch himself revealing too much, his guard slipping, and would abruptly withdraw, his voice hardening, his expression becoming cold and distant once more. These mixed signals created a confusing dynamic, leaving Lena unsure of where she stood. During a company gala, Elias observed Lena across the crowded ballroom. She was radiant, her laughter echoing through the room. He watched as she interacted with other guests, her warmth and charm drawing people to her. A wave of possessiveness, an emotion he hadn't experienced in decades, washed over him. He found himself wanting to pull her away, to shield her from the attention of others. He knew this was irrational, a dangerous deviation from his vow. He clenched his jaw, reminding himself of the pain that awaited him if he allowed himself to feel, to care. Later that evening, Lena approached him, her eyes sparkling. "Mr. Thorne," she began, her voice soft, "thank you for a lovely evening." He looked at her, his gaze intense. "Ms. Reyes," he replied, his voice a low murmur, "you are a valuable asset to the company." The words, carefully chosen, were a poor substitute for what he truly felt. He wanted to tell her how beautiful she looked, how her presence had disrupted his carefully constructed world, how her warmth had begun to thaw the ice around his heart. But the words remained trapped, locked behind the walls he had built so carefully. He simply nodded curtly and turned away, leaving Lena with a mixture of confusion and disappointment. The battle between his head and his heart was escalating, and Elias Thorne was beginning to lose control. The company's annual charity auction was approaching, and Elias, against his better judgment, found himself inviting Lena as his guest. It was a blatant breach of his own rules, a reckless act driven by an impulse he couldn't quite explain. The evening was a blur of champagne, glittering lights, and the constant, unsettling presence of Lena beside him. He felt a strange mix of pride and anxiety, a possessiveness that both thrilled and terrified him. During a lull in the auction, Lena excused herself to take a call. Elias, his gaze following her, noticed a familiar figure approaching her. It was Victor Martel, a former business rival, a man whose betrayal had been a significant factor in Elias's self-imposed isolation. Victor, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent, spoke to Lena, his words low and persuasive. Elias, his gut tightening, approached them. "Ms. Reyes," he said, his voice sharp, "we have an item coming up for auction." Victor turned, a smirk playing on his lips. "Elias," he said, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "Fancy seeing you here, and with such charming company." Lena, her expression confused, looked from Elias to Victor. "Do you two know each other?" she asked. Victor chuckled. "Know each other?" "We're practically family," he said, his eyes locking with Elias's. "Or at least, we were." A wave of unease washed over Elias. He had kept his past dealings with Victor a closely guarded secret, a dark chapter he had buried deep within his memory. He had no idea how Victor knew Lena. "What do you mean?" Lena asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Victor's smirk widened. "Let's just say your father and Elias have a complicated history," he said, his eyes fixed on Elias. Lena's eyes widened. "My father?" she asked, turning to Elias. "What does he mean?" Elias's heart pounded in his chest. He had never told Lena anything about his past, about the betrayal that had shattered his trust. He had no idea that her father, a man he had thought long gone, was Victor's accomplice. "Elias," Lena pressed, her voice trembling, "tell me the truth." "It's complicated," Elias stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Your father and I, we were business partners. He betrayed me, stole from me, ruined me." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "And you never told me?" she whispered, her voice laced with hurt. "I didn't know who you were," Elias said, his voice pleading. "I didn't know you were his daughter." "His daughter?" Victor interjected, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "Yes, Elias, the daughter of the man you destroyed, the man you left with nothing." Lena stared at Elias, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock, betrayal, and pain. "You ruined my father?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You ruined my family?" Elias's world crumbled around him. He had finally allowed himself to feel, to trust, and he had been betrayed once again. But this time, the betrayal was his own. He had allowed his past to poison his present, to destroy the one person who had dared to break down his walls. "Lena," he pleaded, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know." Lena turned away, her face etched with pain. "I need to go," she said, her voice barely audible. "I need to think." She walked away, leaving Elias standing alone, the weight of his past crashing down on him. He had finally found a reason to live, a reason to love, and he had destroyed it with his own hands. The aftermath of the revelation was a desolate landscape. Elias found himself alone, the silence in his penthouse office heavier than ever. He replayed the scene in his mind, the look of betrayal in Lena's eyes, the cold satisfaction on Victor's face. He had made a grave mistake, allowing his past to dictate his present, and he had lost the one person who had dared to break down his walls. He knew he had to make amends. He had to explain, to apologize, to somehow make Lena understand. He spent days trying to reach her, but she wouldn't answer his calls, wouldn't respond to his messages. He even went to her apartment, but she wasn't there. He was left with a gnawing sense of regret, a hollow ache in his chest that echoed the emptiness he had felt for 15 years. Finally, he decided to confront Victor. He found him at a high-end restaurant, his face flushed with triumph. "You enjoyed that, didn't you?" Elias said, his voice low and dangerous. Victor smirked. "Enjoyed what? The truth? It had to come out eventually. You manipulated her," Elias said, his voice trembling with anger. "You used her to hurt me." "And it worked," Victor said, his eyes gleaming. "You're alone again, just like you deserve." Elias realized then that he couldn't change the past, but he could change the future. He couldn't undo the pain he had caused, but he could try to make things right. He left Victor, his mind filled with a newfound sense of clarity. He went back to his office and began to work, not on a new project, but on a letter. He poured his heart out, explaining his past, his fears, his regrets. He confessed his feelings for Lena, his admiration for her strength, his gratitude for her presence in his life. He ended the letter with a simple plea. Please, Lena, give me a chance to explain. Give me a chance to make things right. He sent the letter, along with a bouquet of sunflowers, to Lena's apartment. He waited, his heart pounding in his chest, for any sign of a response. A few days later, Lena walked into his office. Her expression was guarded, her eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and curiosity. I read your letter, she said, her voice soft. Elias stood up, his heart pounding. Lena, he began, his voice trembling. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. I know, she said. I know you were hurt too. They talked for hours, sharing their fears, their vulnerabilities, their hopes. Elias explained his past, his betrayal, his vow. Lena shared her own pain, her confusion, her sense of betrayal. As they talked, a sense of understanding began to emerge. They realized that they were both wounded, both searching for healing, and they realized that they could find that healing together. Elias took Lena's hand, his touch gentle, tentative. Lena, he said, his voice filled with emotion. I love you. I know I don't deserve you, but I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you. Lena smiled, her eyes filled with tears. I love you too, Elias, she said, and I forgive you. They embraced, the warmth of their love melting away the ice that had surrounded them for so long. Elias had finally broken down his walls, and in doing so, he had found his way back to life, to love, to happiness. Looking out the window at the city lights, Elias knew his life had changed forever. Is it ever possible to fully escape the shadows of your past? And can love truly heal even the deepest of wounds?